The backyard buzzed with laughter as paper plates clinked, and someone turned the music up louder. Carine had barely reached the picnic table with a tray of grilled vegetables when her mother's voice cut through every conversation. "Before we eat," Diane called out, lifting her drink with a grin, "I have one more story about our Carine." The chatter stopped. Carine froze where she stood. Diane looked around at the family as if she were about to deliver the highlight of the afternoon. "You know why she's done so well at work, don't you?" She laughed before anyone answered. "She spent so much time climbing the corporate ladder that every man ran in the opposite direction." The yard erupted. Uncles slapped the table. Cousins leaned into one another. Even people who had heard the joke before laughed because everyone else was laughing. "And remember," Diane continued, pointing toward Carine, "when she was 12, she used to practice signing her name with different last names. She thought she'd be married before 25. Another wave of laughter rolled across the yard. Carine's fingers tightened around the serving tray. Then, without saying a single word, she placed it gently on the table, picked up her handbag from the porch chair, and walked toward the gate. Behind her, Diane chuckled. "Oh, don't mind her. She never could take a joke." Nobody followed. Not one person told her to stop. The gate clicked shut behind her. The drive home felt strangely quiet after the noise of the barbecue. Carine didn't cry. She didn't replay the jokes in her head or imagine clever responses she wished she'd said. Instead, she drove with both hands steady on the wheel until she reached a red light. Her phone vibrated. Family barbecue red. One tap was all it took to open the group chat. Pictures were already pouring in, smiling faces, burgers on the grill, children running through sprinklers. Someone had even posted a laughing emoji beneath a photo of Diane pretending to hold an invisible microphone. Carine stared at the screen for a moment before pressing leave conversation ***. The confirmation message appeared. She didn't hesitate. The chat disappeared. When she reached her apartment parking lot, she switched off the engine but remained sitting inside the car. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It almost felt planned. Her eyes drifted toward the passenger seat. A thick blue folder rested there, exactly where she had left it that morning. Across the front, in neat black lettering, were two simple words: relocation documents. She picked it up carefully and rested it in her lap. Inside were signed contracts, mortgage papers, moving schedules, and an offer letter from a company hundreds of miles away. Nothing inside had been prepared after today's barbecue. Every page had been waiting long before her mother ever stood up to tell that joke. Carine closed the folder and looked through the windshield into the fading evening light. The barbecue hadn't started this decision. It had only answered one final question she had been asking herself for months. And now there was no reason to wait any longer. Why had she already been preparing to leave before her family ever laughed at her? Carine unlocked her apartment door, stepped inside, and quietly closed it behind her. The silence greeted her before anything else. Half-filled moving boxes lined one wall of the living room. Books had already been packed. The artwork was gone, leaving pale rectangles on the walls where frames had once hung. She slipped off her shoes, carried the blue relocation folder to the dining table, and opened it. Nothing needed changing. Every signature was already there. Every date had already been confirmed. Her phone buzzed again. "Mom, seriously, you walked out over that." A second notification appeared. "Mark, brother, Mom was joking. Stop making this a bigger deal." Then another. "Aunt Lisa, everyone laughed. Don't ruin the family over one afternoon." Carine read each message. Then she turned the phone face down without answering. She reached for a roll of packing tape instead. As she sealed another box, her eyes landed on a small notebook resting on the shelf. Inside were pages of reminders she had written over the past 2 years. Grandpa's cardiology appointment. Transfer money to Mark before Friday. Buy Mom's birthday cake. Call Aunt Lisa about insurance paperwork. One page after another. None of it had been part of her job. No one had asked how she managed to remember everything. They had simply expected it. She smiled faintly, not because the memories were happy, but because she suddenly understood how normal all of it had become. She had slowly become the person everyone depended on without anyone ever noticing. Her thoughts drifted back through the past few years. When Mark lost his apartment after missing several rent payments, she had quietly transferred enough money to keep him from being evicted. He had promised to repay her. He never did. When their grandmother needed expensive medication that insurance delayed approving, Carine covered the pharmacy bill without mentioning it to anyone except the pharmacist. Months later, her mother thanked an uncle for always being there for the family. Carine had said nothing. When two cousins stopped speaking after an argument over their grandparents' anniversary celebration, everyone called Carine. She spent 3 evenings arranging schedules, changing reservations, and calming everyone down until the gathering happened without another fight. At dinner that night, Diane proudly announced, "See, families always work things out." Again, Carine stayed quiet. Recognition had never seemed worth asking for. Her phone lit up once more. This time, the messages came faster. Cousin Jenna, asterisk your embarrassing mom. Mark, asterisk at least answer somebody. Mom, asterisk you owe me an apology for leaving guests wondering where you went. Carine stared at that last message. An apology. Not a single person had apologized for laughing. Not one message asked whether she was all right. She pressed the power button and switched the phone off completely. The apartment fell silent again. The next morning, Carine arrived at the relocation company's office carrying one final envelope. A representative greeted her with a smile. "Good morning, Ms. Brooks." "Morning. We've got everything almost finished, just one signature." He slid the final document across the desk. "This confirms your moving date for next week." Carine read it carefully. One last signature. One last commitment. She signed her name. The representative smiled. "Congratulations. We'll have your belongings delivered directly to your new address." "Thank you." For the first time all weekend, someone had spoken to her without teasing her, blaming her, or expecting something from her. That afternoon, she returned to her apartment and continued packing. Most of the shelves were now empty. Only one framed photograph remained. It showed the entire family gathered around her grandparents on Christmas morning. Everyone was smiling. Carine picked it up and studied it for a long moment. Then she placed it carefully inside the kitchen drawer instead of a moving box. Some memories belonged in the past. Not every picture needed to follow her into the future. Just then, her laptop chimed. A video call request from her new employer. She accepted it. Her future manager smiled warmly from the screen. "Hi, Carine. Just checking that everything's still on schedule." "It is. We're looking forward to having you here." He glanced at his calendar before looking back up. "We'll see you Monday." He smiled again. "Everything is ready for your new beginning." The following Sunday, Diane arranged another family lunch. The barbecue had already become a story she told with a laugh. As relatives filled the backyard again, she waved a hand dismissively. "Carine always was too sensitive," she said while arranging plates on the picnic table. "Give her another day or two, she'll realize she overreacted." A few people nodded. No one questioned her. Mark glanced toward the driveway. "Has anyone heard from her?" Diane shrugged. "She's trying to make a point." Another cousin laughed. "She'll come around when she gets bored." The conversation moved on. But Carine never arrived. An hour later, the empty chair beside the table was becoming impossible to ignore. Grandpa looked around. "She never misses Sunday lunch." Grandma quietly agreed. She always calls if she's running late. For the first time all afternoon, Diane reached for her phone. She called. Straight to voicemail. She frowned. Mark tried next. Voicemail again. Then Aunt Lisa. The same result. One by one, everyone tried. No answer. The laughter that had filled the backyard a week earlier slowly disappeared. The next morning, Mark decided to stop by Carine's apartment. He knocked. Nothing. He knocked again. Still nothing. As he turned to leave, the apartment manager stepped into the hallway carrying a clipboard. "Can I help you? I'm looking for my sister. The tenant in 4B. Yeah." The manager nodded politely. "Oh, she moved out." Mark blinked. "What do you mean she moved out?" "Last week." He stared. "Are you sure?" "I supervise the movers myself." The manager checked the clipboard. She completed all the paperwork, transferred her utilities, and turned in her keys. Mark didn't answer. He simply looked toward the apartment door that no longer belonged to his sister. He called Diane before reaching his car. "Mom." "What?" "She's gone." "What do you mean she's gone?" "The apartment's empty." Silence. Then Diane laughed awkwardly. "She probably rented storage." "No." "The manager said she moved." "Where?" "He doesn't know." Diane's confidence cracked for the first time. By that evening, several relatives gathered outside the empty apartment building. The curtains were gone. The mailbox stood open. Inside, there was no mail. Only a forwarding notice. The electricity account had been closed. The internet service disconnected. Everything had been planned. Everything had been finished. Nobody had known. As they stood in the parking lot, Cousin Jenna suddenly frowned. "Wait." Everyone turned. She looked genuinely confused. "Who's organizing Grandpa's physical therapy appointments next month?" No one answered. She looked at Aunt Lisa. "I thought you were." "I thought Carine was." Mark spoke up. "What about Grandma's medication schedule?" Grandma looked surprised. "I always called Carine." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Grandpa quietly asked, "Who's arranging the hotel reservations for our anniversary trip?" No one knew. One question became another. Who has the shared expense spreadsheet? Who renews Grandma's insurance paperwork? Who reminds everyone about birthdays? Who books the holiday cabin every December? Each question ended exactly the same way. Nobody had an answer. That night, Diane sat at her kitchen table trying to convince herself none of it mattered. "She's proving a point," she muttered. Mark looked unconvinced. "Mom, what if she isn't?" Diane folded her arms. "She'll come back." "But what if she doesn't?" Before Diane could answer, she heard the metallic sound of the mailbox outside. She walked to the front door, opened it, and bent down. One plain white envelope rested inside. No decorations. No return address. Only two handwritten words across the front. "Mom." Diane immediately recognized the handwriting. It was Carine's. Diane carried the envelope inside without saying a word. Mark watched from the kitchen doorway. "Are you going to open it?" She hesitated for a moment before carefully breaking the seal. There was no dramatic note. No accusations. No list of old arguments. Just a neatly typed letter. She began reading aloud. "Mom asterisk. I'm safe, and I hope all of you are healthy. I didn't leave because I wanted anyone to suffer. I left because I finally accepted that I cannot continue living where being the family joke is considered normal. Please don't worry about me. I've started a new chapter, and I sincerely hope each of you finds happiness as well." Diane reached the bottom of the page. There was one final sentence. I've attached something that may help during the transition. She looked down. A second document was clipped behind the letter. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a checklist. Across the top, Carine had typed, "Family responsibilities, currently managed by Carine Brooks." Below it were pages of carefully organized notes. Grandpa's cardiologist appointments. Grandma's prescription refill schedule. Insurance renewal dates. Emergency contact numbers. The login information for the shared family calendar. Instructions for paying the cabin reservation deposits. The spreadsheet used to divide holiday expenses. Birthdays. Anniversaries. Maintenance schedules. Even reminders about which cousins couldn't attend certain weekends because of work. Mark slowly turned the pages. I didn't even know this existed. Neither had anyone else. Within days, the effects became impossible to ignore. Grandpa missed a specialist appointment because no one realized it had already been rescheduled months earlier. A payment for the annual family reunion venue wasn't submitted on time. The reservation was canceled. 2 relatives argued over money because the shared expense records were no longer being updated. Grandma called Aunt Lisa in tears. "I thought Carine always handled this. I thought somebody else knew how." So did I. Every problem revealed another invisible task Carine had quietly carried. The pressure inside the family shifted. Instead of asking why Carine had left, people started asking a different question. How long has she been doing all this by herself? No one knew. Mark sat with the checklist spread across his dining table. He shook his head. "I only called her when I needed something." Across the room, Grandpa spoke quietly. "Most of us did." No one argued. Because it was true. Diane reread the letter several times that week. Each time, she searched for anger. There wasn't any. No insults. No blame. Only boundaries. For the first time in years, there was nothing she could dismiss as disrespect. Carine hadn't attacked anyone. She had simply stopped carrying them. That realization settled heavily over the house. Hundreds of miles away, Carine unpacked the final box in her new home. The neighborhood was quieter than she expected. She placed books onto freshly built shelves, hung a framed landscape in the living room, and opened the windows to let in the afternoon breeze. On Monday morning, she walked into her new office. A receptionist greeted her with a smile. "Welcome, Carine. Everyone's excited you're here." Her manager introduced her to the team. People asked about her experience. They listened to her answers. No one interrupted. No one laughed at her expense. By Friday afternoon, a coworker leaned over the divider. "A few of us are getting coffee after work. Want to join us?" Carine smiled. "I'd like that." The invitation was simple. No conditions. No hidden jokes. Just genuine kindness. Back home that evening, her phone buzzed. One voicemail. Then another. Then another. They were all from Diane. The first sounded defensive. The second sounded uncertain. By the fourth, her mother's voice had softened. "Carine, I'd like to talk whenever you're ready." Carine stared at the screen for several seconds. She reached toward the voicemail icon. Her finger hovered above it. Before she could press play. Knock, knock. Someone was at her front door. Carine looked from her phone to the front door. The voicemails remained unheard. The knocking came again, gentle this time. She opened the door. A woman about her age stood on the porch, holding a small basket. "Hi," she said with an easy smile. "I'm Melissa. I live next door." Carine blinked in surprise. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No," Carine replied. "Not at all." Melissa held out the basket. "A few of us on the street put together a little welcome gift whenever someone moves in. We thought we'd stop by before the weekend got busy." Inside were homemade cookies, a handwritten list of nearby restaurants, and a small potted herb. Nothing expensive, nothing elaborate, just a thoughtful gesture from people who barely knew her. "That's incredibly kind," Carine said. "We're having a neighborhood barbecue next Saturday," Melissa added. "If you're free, we'd love for you to come." No one laughed. No one made a joke at her expense. No one expected her to earn the invitation. As Melissa walked back to her house, Carine stood quietly on the porch, looking down at the welcome basket. It struck her that complete strangers had shown her more consideration in 5 minutes than she'd received from her own family in years. She closed the door, set the basket on the kitchen counter, and finally let herself believe something she had never truly accepted before. Respect wasn't something she had to earn by solving everyone's problems. It was something healthy people offered freely. 4 months earlier, long before the family barbecue, Carine had accepted the executive position. She had toured the new city, signed the employment contract, purchased a modest home, scheduled the movers. Every practical step had been completed. Only one decision remained unfinished. Should she tell her family? She delayed it again and again, hoping that perhaps, just once, they would celebrate her instead of turning her accomplishments into entertainment. The annual barbecue felt like one last opportunity. If they could simply be happy for her, she would tell them about the promotion that afternoon. Instead, Diane stood up, called for everyone's attention, and transformed Carine's success into another punchline. The laughter answered the question Carine had been carrying for months. She finished the meal only by leaving it. Back home, the family struggled with more than schedules and paperwork. Without Carine quietly coordinating everything behind the scenes, misunderstandings multiplied. The anniversary trip for her grandparents had to be postponed because reservations weren't made in time. Bills that had always been paid before deadlines suddenly required frantic phone calls. Birthday reminders were forgotten. Simple tasks turned into arguments about whose responsibility they had always been. During one Sunday lunch, Grandpa finally put down his fork. "I've been thinking," he said. The table fell silent. "We've spent weeks talking about what Carine stopped doing." He looked around at each member of the family. "But we've hardly talked about what we did to make her leave." No one answered. Aunt Lisa lowered her eyes. Mark stared at his plate. Even the children sensed the change in the room. Grandma quietly added, "She was always the first person to arrive and the last person to leave. We noticed the work after she was gone." The words lingered. There was no argument because no one could honestly disagree. Over the following weeks, relatives began reaching out to Carine individually. Aunt Lisa called first. "I should have spoken up that day." Carine listened. "I laughed because everyone else did," her aunt admitted. "That doesn't make it right." "I know," Carine answered calmly. Mark sent a long email. He apologized for every time he accepted her help without asking how she was managing. He included a repayment plan for the money she had loaned him years earlier. Carine appreciated the effort, but she didn't rush to rebuild what had taken years to damage. Trust, she had learned, returned slowly. Diane waited the longest. Every voicemail became shorter, less defensive, more honest. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Several months later, a handwritten letter arrived at Carine's new address. She recognized the familiar handwriting immediately. Inside were only a few paragraphs. There were no excuses. No mention of being too sensitive. No attempt to explain away the barbecue. Diane wrote that she had spent months replaying that afternoon in her mind. She admitted she had confused getting laughs with showing love. She acknowledged that she had expected Carine to absorb every joke because she always had. Most importantly, she apologized without asking for anything in return. Carine read the letter twice before placing it back into the envelope. The next evening, she sat at her dining table and wrote a response. She thanked her mother for taking responsibility. She accepted the apology. Then she wrote one sentence she had never believed she was allowed to write. I forgive you, but I won't return to the life I left. There was no anger in the letter. Only clarity. She mailed it the next morning. Work continued to flourish. Carine's communication strategies helped improve collaboration across departments, and before long, she was leading projects she once would have hesitated to accept. Her house gradually became a home. Friends from work stopped by for dinner. Neighbors waved whenever she walked past. Weekends no longer revolved around solving someone else's emergency. She planted flowers along the backyard fence. She started reading on quiet Sunday mornings with a cup of coffee instead of checking everyone's schedules. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt deserved. Months later, Melissa's neighborhood barbecue finally arrived. Children chased each other across the grass. Someone asked Carine to help judge a homemade pie contest. Another neighbor handed her a plate before she even reached the serving table. "We're glad you're here," he said. The words were simple, but they were sincere. Carine looked around the yard. People laughed together, not at one another. She smiled, realizing that leaving her family's barbecue without a word had never been about escaping one cruel joke. It had been about walking toward a life where kindness didn't have to be earned, respect wasn't conditional, and home finally felt like a place where laughter included her instead of coming at her expense.